My name is Layla. I was in my mid-30s when I received the diagnosis, cancer. The word hit me like a punch to the chest. One moment I was planning dinner with my husband, and the next I was sitting in a cold, sterile hospital room with a doctor explaining stages and statistics. I felt numb, as if everything around me was a movie and I was merely watching. Within days, I was rushed into chemotherapy. The treatments were harsh. My body changed quickly. My hair fell out in clumps. I couldn't keep food down. My energy vanished. I was no longer the vibrant woman who danced in the kitchen or went hiking on weekends. I became a ghost in my own life. My husband Aaron tried to be supportive at first, but I could feel the shift. He started staying late at work. He stopped holding my hand during treatments, and eventually he stopped sleeping next to me at all. I told myself he was scared too, overwhelmed, that he needed time. I never imagined he was seeking comfort in the arms of someone else, let alone my best friend. Chemotherapy had drained nearly every ounce of strength I had, and the emotional toll was even heavier. I barely recognized myself in the mirror, bald, pale, and hollow-eyed. The woman who once turned heads with confidence and laughter now avoided her reflection altogether. Aaron stopped looking at me, too. The man who once said I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen now barely made eye contact. Intimacy became a memory. I blamed the cancer. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, once I recovered, things would return to normal. But even in my fog of fatigue and medication, I started noticing changes. He was on his phone constantly, always typing, always smiling at something or someone I couldn't see. He'd disappear for long hours under the excuse of work. When I asked where he'd been, his replies were vague, dismissive. One evening, after a particularly brutal treatment, I came home to an empty house. Aaron wasn't answering my calls. I dragged myself to the couch, trembling and sick, and there it was, his phone, left carelessly on the coffee table. I wasn't the type to snoop, but something told me I had to look. The messages I read changed everything. She looks like a man now. I can't even stand to touch her. You're the only one who makes me feel alive. Just a little longer. Once she's out of the picture, we can be together. The sender? Sophie, my best friend since college. The woman who held my hand when I first got the diagnosis, who bought me soup and blankets and pretended to cry for me when my hair fell out. I dropped the phone. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. I just sat there, silent, shaking, like I'd been dropped into ice water. In that moment, I realized something that would shape everything that came after. Pity is a weakness, and I was done being weak. The next morning, I confronted Aaron. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply handed him his phone, the screen still open on Sophie's latest message. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he muttered, "Layla, you have to understand. I've been alone in this too." Alone? He said that to the woman who faced death alone, who vomited blood alone, who sat in sterile hospital rooms for hours with nothing but the sound of beeping machines to keep her company. I filed for divorce that same week. Aaron moved out. Moved in with her, I assumed. Neither of them reached out after. I suppose they believed I was already gone, that I wouldn't survive long enough to care. But I did. The weeks that followed were a blur of cold hospital beds and even colder stares. Nurses came and went. Doctors whispered numbers and percentages. I clung to survival like it was the only thing I had left to prove, because in many ways it was. The cancer didn't kill me. The loneliness almost did. I remember one night in particular. The chemo had stripped me of everything. My strength, my beauty, my hope. I stared at the IV in my arm and thought, maybe it would be easier to just stop fighting. But then I remembered Sophie's words. She looks like a man now. Aaron's reply, I can't even touch her. I gritted my teeth. Number, I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to live. Not just live, rebuild. Recovery was brutal, but I endured it. It took nearly 2 years to regain control over my body. The treatments left scars both visible and hidden. My hair slowly returned, softer and darker than before. My body felt unfamiliar, but it was mine. Rebuilt, reclaimed. The day I was officially declared in remission, I didn't cry. I stood in front of the mirror and whispered, You survived. Now rise. I returned to work, my real work. Before the diagnosis, I had been a senior project manager at a global architecture firm, the kind of job that demanded brilliance and gave little in return. I'd walked away from it during my treatments, but now I came back, fiercer than ever. My first day back, my boss looked shocked. Layla, I wasn't sure you'd want to return after everything. I smiled. I didn't come back to want. I came back to win. And I did. Within months, I'd landed one of the firm's largest international contracts. My name started circulating again. In design circles, award lists, whispered admiration. But none of that compared to what I planned next. See, somewhere along the way, I had heard whispers, tiny pieces of gossip that Sophie and Aaron didn't last long. She left him 6 months after I moved out. Apparently, he was too emotionally distant for her. He moved back in with his parents. Sophie, I assumed, found a new distraction. Good. Let them rot in their own mediocrity. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I had one last chapter to write. It was almost poetic how it all came together. A year had passed since I'd last spoken Aaron's name out loud. One afternoon, during a routine business trip to Portland, I ran into an old acquaintance, Marcus. He was Sophie's husband, or rather, her ex-husband now. We hadn't spoken much back then, but he recognized me instantly. You look incredible, Layla, he said, genuinely surprised. Cancer has a way of either destroying you or rebuilding you, I replied. I chose the latter. We sat at a corner cafe and I told him everything. How Sophie and Aaron betrayed me. How I endured treatment in silence while they played house. How I rebuilt from ashes what they tried to burn. At first he was quiet. Then his expression shifted from sympathy to rage. She told me you'd given up, that you'd pushed Aaron away. I nodded. Lies are easier to sell when the truth is sick in bed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and smiled the kind of smile you only see on someone who's just seen the map to revenge. You know. I think it's time she got what she deserves. And that's when the final domino began to fall. Marcus had kept records, texts, emails, even a few voicemails Sophie left during their affair. She hadn't been careful. She thought she'd won. What neither of them expected was that the woman they buried would rise sharper, smarter, and more dangerous than before. Marcus and I compiled everything: evidence of the affair, stolen funds from their shared accounts, even proof that Aaron had been using my medical records to excuse his absences at work. Corporate fraud. We sent the dossier anonymously to Sophie's employer, a prestigious PR agency with zero tolerance for scandal, Aaron's medical board, where lies can cost you a license, and most importantly, to Sophie herself on her birthday. The fallout was cinematic. Sophie was fired within 48 hours. Her image as a female empowerment strategist couldn't survive a betrayal scandal backed with receipts. Her reputation was shattered and no agency would touch her name again. Aaron? His license was suspended pending an investigation. He lost his job at the clinic. I heard he tried to argue his case, but once the board received my testimony, signed and notarized, it was over. A week later, Marcus texted me a photo. It was Aaron, standing outside a courthouse yelling at Sophie, who was crying and shoving him away. The caption just read, "And so the gods of irony deliver their final blow." I stared at the photo for a long time. No tears, no rage, just a calm satisfaction deep in my chest. I didn't burn their house down. I simply opened the windows and let the truth in. Now I live quietly. My name continues to grow in my field, but I don't chase recognition anymore. I have a cozy apartment with walls I painted myself, a record player that spins Nina Simone at night, and a garden that blooms with terrifying grace. Sometimes I think about Aaron and Sophie, not with pain, but with detachment. They're chapters in a story that no longer controls me. And every once in a while, when the night is still and the silence wraps around me like a familiar coat, I think of that moment in the hospital, the lowest point. Bald, broken, begging life to give me one more chance. And I whisper to myself, "You survived. You rose. And when it mattered most, you won."